It sure is. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Developing Volunteer Talent. My name is Danny Chipley from the CBAA. That's me there on your video screens there at the moment. Don't worry, I'm not going to be there for too long. I just wanted to let you know that you are indeed talking to a human. Before we start with today's session, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we broadcast, that are the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay respects to elders past and present, acknowledging that sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Today's session, Developing Volunteer Talent, Volunteers Power, the community broadcasting sector, with over 22,000 individuals across the country, keeping community radio vital and vibrant. We're hoping to, with today's webinar, provide sort of some real world examples and learning for sort of getting people through the door at your station, eliminating barriers to entry, helping you identify the strengths of your volunteers and the role of the board or committee management in dealing with volunteers there at your station. Ren, Engagement Coordinator at 3MDR, who will be able to give a much better rundown of everything that they do for community broadcasting, will be on your mic really soon. But Ren has been with community broadcasting at 3MDR since 2014, has worked in community services and education beyond that, and he's just an all-round bloody legend. It's one of the brightest parts of my days when I get to have a chat to Ren about all the great stuff they're doing. Presenter of the Dotted Line program, the award-winning Dotted Line program. But that's enough about from me. Ren, the floor is yours, the mic is yours. Thank you so much for presenting today, and away you go.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I would also just like to acknowledge the land from which I am presenting this webinar today. I'm on the Kulin Nation of the Wurundjeri people down here in Melbourne. As I was just saying to Danny and Michaela, we've had a bit of a time down here in Melbourne. Big storm went through very early Thursday morning, and 3MDR got power back yesterday. I have had to do this at home though because the internet's gone out, so I apologise if it gets a bit sketchy. A lot of the services down here at the moment are not functioning at 100%, but moving right along. So, developing volunteer talent. This is a massive topic, but we're going to scoot through as much as we can today. And also we have a very special guest joining us, I think at about 11:20, Bharathi, who won the inaugural Community Radio Volunteer of the Year People's Choice Award, will be coming in to share his pearls of wisdom as well, hopefully at about 11:20 in this webinar today. So that's going to be absolutely fantastic. I actually am really looking forward to hearing from him today as well. So today we are going to look at getting people through the door at your station, eliminating barriers to entry, identifying the strengths of your volunteers, and the role of the board or committee of management as volunteers as well. So moving straight into it. But first things first, my number one managing volunteers tip, as it feeds into absolutely everything I'm going to say today, pick your battles, and if you can, don't pick many. That's the one thing that I have definitely learned in my time at 3MDR. In the inaugural Frozen song, I don't have kids, I don't know what that is, but Let It Go is my word of the day, my term of the day, sorry. So yeah, you will have to pick some battles, but the fewer that you can pick, the better, basically. It allows your community to feel like they belong, that they have some ownership, and it creates buy-in if you allow them to step up to the plate, basically, take the fore and run with ideas and do things at your station. Things don't always have to be done the way you want to do things. Sometimes, a lot of the time, you have to let other people step in because that also relieves you of work. You just have to kind of put faith in them. They are like so enthusiastic, your presenters and other volunteers. They want to be there. They turn up every week. These people love your station. So you want to give them an opportunity to really embrace the whole experience that your station can bring, I guess, and that they can bring to the station. All right. So getting people through the door. Does your station have an open door policy? I guess at 3MDR, we have an open door policy. Everyone and anyone is welcome. and we mostly will say yes to things, which does also get us into trouble, but that's a whole separate webinar. In terms of workload and capacity, that's all that gets us into trouble with. But basically, yeah, everyone is welcome at all times. So that's our open door policy. We don't put conditions on things as much as we can. And yeah, we just try and say yes as much as possible, basically, to allow people to volunteer how they would like to volunteer with us, and just so that they understand that 3MDR is a space for everyone in our community, and it's a safe space, and yeah, the door is always open, basically. So this is an interesting question. Do you have multiple ways that people can get involved at your station? So this is another thing about getting people through the door, because our experience has been, once you allow them in the door, even if they didn't want to start broadcasting or whatever their hook might be, it gets people in and they just will love your station and they'll want to stay, and then they'll do more and more and more stuff. So it's really important to allow people multiple entryways into your station. So obviously there's broadcasting. There's committees and subcommittees, like your committee of management, programming committees, fundraising, event committees, sponsorship subcommittees, things like that. There are lots of different ways that people can get involved at 3MDR. We like to keep it as open as possible. There's admin, so things like database management or just data entry, answering the phones, responding to emails, things like that. That's another way, definitely, that you can do that stuff. And also content creation, so voiceovers, social media stuff, photos, videos, things like that. Yeah, there's lots of different ways that your station can be assisted with content creation. Tech, of course, but hard and soft. So not just broadcast and communications technology, things like your IT systems and soldering bits and pieces and making leads and like social media, website management, databases, all things like that are all technology and all required at your station. So production and media library, again, you might have people who are more than willing to put announcements together for you or create CSAs and things like that. And that's a time-consuming job. And if you can give them some guidelines around how that needs to sound, and then just let them go, as I might have mentioned earlier. Media library is another huge one. I don't know about you guys, but we get like so many new music submissions. We get AMRAP CD mail outs and stuff like that. And so we've built up a little gang of people who each have their genre preferences, and they will go through what we get submitted to the station and let us know what is what we should be putting into our media library and things like that. So it's another thing. Graphic design and art is always a huge one. Graphic design is really expensive. Canva is fantastic, obviously, but if you wanted to get something special done, like a radiothon, you know, or a fundraising t-shirt or something like that, you never know who might be at your station and willing to provide some of those services for nothing, or at least for an acknowledgement or a nominal fee, things like that. The other thing that I want to mention here is that 3MDR is actually registered with Centrelink as an approved volunteer placement. So we have had a lot of, especially our more mature age volunteers, come through when they have to do their 15 hours a week or a fortnight or whatever ages all that stuff kicks in. So it was a really painless registration process at Centrelink, and it means that they get their payments and we get their person hours. And that's an ongoing way of getting volunteers as well. Pretty much they have to age out of that system. And if you've done enough love, you might keep them for a bit further anyway, even once they've aged out into their pensions, etc. But that is a really great way of getting volunteers at your station, and it's a win-win because they get their payments as well. So that's worked really well for us at 3MDR, and I would definitely recommend that stations have a look at that process with their Centrelink office. Okay, so eliminating barriers to entry. So it's all well and good if you have an open door policy, but what then, I guess? Like lots of stations will say, oh yeah, our door is open, our door is open. But then once you put your foot through the door, there's actually a whole lot of conditions on what that might look like. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that right now. There's the whole how many hoops do potential volunteers have to jump through before they can join in at your station. And there are really reasonable things like signing up to be a station member, You might have a working with children's check that you need to have in place. You might have a station volunteer rights and responsibilities and or presenter agreement document, code of conduct type of thing at your station that you have in place. And they're really great pieces of documentation that I would actually recommend that you all have, and processes that you all have in place. However, beyond that, I really don't think that there should be many more barriers to getting people involved at your station. You can have under 18 volunteers. That is a little bit of a separate thing, and it is definitely worth going through CBAA or your local state volunteering organisation support to find out what you need to have in place at your station, depending on the state, around having underage volunteers. But you can definitely do it, and we certainly have a lot of students come and do placements and stuff like that. And the rumours are true. They pick up technology really fast, and they can be on air really fast, and they'll make you announcements, and it's all good fun times when you have young people involved at your station. And then this is a big one for me. Are broadcasters given free rein within the legislated guidelines, of course, over the content of their show? So at 3MDR, we absolutely do not interfere with any part of any show ever. You can even have, you can be potty mouthed yourself, I guess, and certainly have potty mouth music. We try not to have that at school pickup times in the car. That's when obviously we don't want to be having a lot of that happening. But we also have some school-aged programs, and if they choose potty mouth music, we just give it a language warning, and at the end of the day, that's their choice. We don't have any rules around content type or music type or anything like that. We are not trying to be a commercial station. The opposite, we are trying to be an alternative to a commercial station. So I would be thinking very carefully about that at your station, if that is currently something that you have in place, in terms of being very prescriptive about, you know, genre types and yeah, just content kind of, I'm going to call it censorship. That's probably a bit kind of harsh, but yeah, just being too constrained around the types of shows and content that you might have on during the day, because that is going to stop people from wanting to volunteer at your station. All right, so are volunteers given opportunities to create buy-in and have ownership at your station? So this is buy-in and ownership is being able to make decisions, drive projects, however big or small, but also challenge, it's also up to your station to challenge long-held ownership issues, usually by a powerful, influential, vocal few who are not acting or making decisions in the best interest of the station. So there's a balancing act with this kind of one, but I fully think that giving volunteers projects to do and ways to be involved in the station so that they have more sense of belonging and more ownership and buy-in at the station is definitely the way to go. And this is the pick your battle stuff. Like at what does it hurt to give people creative control over something, or what does it hurt to let a group of people put together a project or a fundraiser or an event or whatever, and think about the time that that's going to save you as a staff person or leadership volunteer at your station. Not everything has to be controlled with an iron grip, and don't worry, I'm a control freak. I totally understand all of that side of the world. However, I would challenge you that it does stop your station from growing, and it stops your volunteers from being able to really feel like they belong. Now, the other side of that is that, yeah, you can have people become embedded that are not good for your station. I've had many, many conversations with stations of all different shapes and sizes over my time in the community broadcasting sector, and it is an oft found problem. It is hard to negotiate your way out of, but you can get support. The CBAA is very happy to support with those kinds of difficult conversations and give you some ways of being able to negotiate that at your station. Your peak volunteer organisation within your state can also help with that, and we'll have some resources about, for those a little bit later on as well. But yeah, it is a tricky situation, and what I would say is don't let the acts or the attitude of the few destroy it for the many. Volunteering at a station is a cross-section of our community, and just like every other part in our community, it has the good, the bad and the ugly. So you're always going to get a small percentage of volunteers who are harder work than others. But when you're having those days, just try and think back to the last really positive example of a volunteer engagement you had, and remember that that is actually the majority. And remember that those volunteers who just love it and would do anything for you are the ones that you need to remember when things get tough, and when you've got some recalcitrant volunteers who are maybe making life a little bit hard. Yeah, they are the few. Just try and remember that at all times, because volunteer management is exhausting, and you do need to look after yourselves, and you need to make sure that you've got support in place from either within your station or from appropriate organizations outside of your station. And yeah, because we want every station to be doing really well, and we want the volunteers at those stations to be firing on all cylinders, and that includes the ones managing the volunteers as well. All right, so just moving on from that is, are new broadcasters welcomed? I hear an amazingly high amount of stories of broadcasters really being keen to broadcast at a station and it just being made so hard for them. So this is a tricky one, because you obviously have ACMA licensing obligations around local content, or most stations would, apart from the specialised licenses, but that's bigger stations generally. So there is actually a requirement with your license to have local content, and that would come from local people predominantly. And for me, it's almost inexcusable if you have multiple presenters presenting multiple shows or very long shows across your grid, and they may have done that for some time, and that's going to be a challenging conversation to get them to give it up a little bit, you know. But that's what I was talking about, that ownership stuff, you know, and finding the balance between what's healthy and helpful and what starts to be negative at your station, and having those challenging conversations with those presenters that have got 3 2-hour shows across your grid, which is stopping that one new show from being able to come on. You know, that's really a worthwhile conversation to have. Again, if you need support to have those conversations, CBAA is a place to go. And, you know, is it really, I would look at it this way. If I had to have that difficult conversation and that one broadcaster got huffy with me and decided that they were going to take their 6 hours of content somewhere else, that for me would actually be an opportunity. I would not have a problem with that. People are allowed to self-select as long as you're respectful and fair in the way that you conduct your conversations. If that broadcaster can't understand that giving up 2 hours is going to mean that a new broadcaster can come on board and have their opportunity to share their voice and their platform with their community, I would question that volunteer's motivation for being on air anyway. So I know that's very tricky and that starts kind of getting complicated, but for me, that is where the balance has to be struck. You should be able to be actively recruiting for new broadcasters. You should be, you know, putting calls out. You should be able to just have like a sign up form on your website. And then, you know, you should be willing to make room on your grid for new people. It's an ongoing issue at every station, because we have the opposite problem. Our grid's pretty full, and then you're trying to get new people in. And of course, they all want between 5 and 9 p.m. at night, and that can't happen. There does need to be a little bit of an earn your spot in those higher demand time slots, and that's up to each station to manage. CMTO offers really great program review training that you can do at your station if you're interested in, you know, learning how to navigate that whole situation. So that might be something worth looking at. But yeah, I think that don't forget the whole ACMA licensing obligation around what needs to be on offer at your station as well. So Danny, are we ready to swing to our special guest, or will I keep going?
I am ready to do that, Bharati. I'm just going to make you a panelist now, so it'll drop you out of the session and bring you back in. Thank you so much for everything so far. Ren, the point you brought up there before about the Centrelink volunteers, when we get to the question and answer time for that, Lisa, just letting you know, I will raise your queries then. And indeed, I'm also looking to find out about a bit more about that whole situation, because I think that's a wonderful untapped voluntary resource that you refer to there. I think it's one of those things where if you can make the relationship official, it would be of benefit to all parties involved. But we'll come back to that one now. Bharati Rajendraan, do you hear me? Can we
Hello,
get a...
Danny. Yes, of course.
Oh, excellent.
Again.
We're getting audio from you. Bharati, everyone, is the winner of the inaugural Community Radio Volunteer of the Year People's Choice Award. As part of his voluntary role, he transformed outdoor programming at 4EB since becoming a volunteer, bringing new broadcasters to the station as well as mentoring and training. And we're just going to let him address the audience here for a few minutes. So thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure's mine, Danny. Thanks for inviting me for this webinar. So, yeah, I'll quickly share my experiences. How about how interesting is the volunteering is. So, just the volunteering gets better when you actually try to pull more volunteers in your group. Like when you have more people, you actually have less workload. So we always have are actively looking for new volunteers. So what we do is like we just go to the uni drives, like where the new students, they get to have that induction session kind of stuff. So we go there and then we talk about the radio and then we pull in the interested people from there. So I think that's the best place you can get those fresh fresh people who are ready to contribute for the broadcasting, who was ready for the contributing for the community. So the biggest challenge we have that stage is like some people tend to understand that the radio is just like a commercial radio, or like they can just speak, talk anything just for the entertainment purpose. But we have to make them clear that this is not just entertainment, this is a responsibility too, where you actually try to show something, give something for the community. So we need to set the boundaries clear to get the right people. So we use the different social media channels so that we attract the new volunteers to get or to let them know about the studio radio stations. So once it's all done, then we onboard them onto the formal training in our Radio 4EB. So we have a wonderful trainer, Jeff, who can give an excellent training and make them understand what are do's and don'ts in our station. So once that's done, and then we try to bring him to the studio for these shows. So one of the biggest challenges we've seen people is like they are little hesitant in speaking in radio the first time. Some people tend to speak in traditional way to start with, which actually is not their cup of tea. I mean, like they just get searching for the words and things like that. So we always encourage them to speak in very casual way, like day-to-day activities, how they speak with us. So that will actually calm them down, and they'll probably help them to get over the anxiety and nervousness. And also, we also tend to have mentors for the new volunteers. Like whenever the new volunteer comes in, we actually assign a mentor for those new volunteers so that they actually can reach out to their mentors if there's any doubt or query, something like that, to whom they are comfortable with. So that actually eases them out. It actually helps them to um, get into the groove very easily, like. And also we always prefer them to discuss something which they are comfortable with to start with. For instance, if we ask a new volunteer to come into the station and then speak something that you wanted to, they'll be a little hesitant and they need to do a lot of research and then be a little reluctant to get into the groove. So what we prefer is like, okay, whatever the topic you are comfortable with. For instance, if there is a person who's a teacher who's coming for a volunteering for the radio station, we ask them the questions or we have the discussion with them regarding the teaching profession, which will be more comfortable to start with. So this is how you actually get the volunteers into your group. You make them feel comfortable in the radio broadcasting. So once they are done, then you can actually make most out of them. And the next thing is like finding out the strengths of your volunteers, which is a really an important thing to start with. Uh, Certain volunteers are very interested in the social media and techie stuff. We do have volunteers who are very interested in literature and talking about the history. So we just need to figure out what interest they have and what are their strengths. So once we know what they can do, then we actually give them more of that role. For instance, when I started, I was given the freedom to talk about what I wanted to. So I then was going all on technological side, and then my senior volunteers, they figured out, okay, this guy is good in technical and technological stuff, so let them give him more roles. So I'm the one who's taking care of our Radio 4DB Tamil groups Facebooks and social media stuff and handling little bit of technical side of our group. So this is how we actually bring out the strengths of your volunteers and then make most out of them. Once you get to the volunteers, the biggest challenge I would say is like retaining the volunteers. That is the biggest challenge I've seen. Like some people, when they get into the community broadcasting, they will not have seen the radio stations before, so they get excited, they get really interested while doing the shows. But over the due course of time, they get bored or they lose interest of doing the shows. So then they find reasons to actually reduce the volunteering. So that's when actually you need to pitch in, you need to motivate them, appreciate them for their work, what they're doing, and then keep them going. So that is the biggest challenge we always had. As a Radio 4DB Tamil group, we always think that volunteering is not just that one person alone, uh, because it's there is the person's family and friends also contributions there, because a person who is volunteering could easily spend the time with his family or his friends. So, but instead he or she chose to do the volunteering job. So definitely he's sacrificing time with his families and friends. So we need to acknowledge that. So what we do for that is like we tend to do uh, family gathering, like a people gathering, that we used to do like 2 to 3 times per year. Like this is all pre-COVID. So what we tend to do is like we encourage them to bring their families and friends for a barbecue for a whole day session, and then we have a lot of games and share the food. Things like that will actually keep them more engaged and more connected. And also we tend to motivate them and appreciate the volunteers for their role, for the contribution they're doing in front of their families and friends, which will actually motivate them more. So this is the good side of how you can actually keep the volunteers, retaining
I
the
believe
volunteers,
they've only
which is
got
a
7.
important thing in the volunteering role. And as a committee, as a management committee, as a group, so it's the responsibility for us to keep the communication happening. I mean, like to create the proper communication channel for the volunteers to communicate within themselves. So what we've done is like we created some WhatsApp group for the Radio 4DB Tamil group, where we actually allow the volunteers to be the part of the group where they can communicate within themselves. As a management committee member, you don't need to do much over there. So once we created the channel for them to talk within themselves, so they can actually do the stuff like that. For instance, like if I'm committed to do already a program like in next 2 3 days for unforeseen reason I couldn't do that, probably I can just quickly put my status on the WhatsApp group. I can say if someone could take up my show for the next 2 days, probably I would swap for another day. So someone could easily come in and take up my show. Instead, if we don't create the communication channel, the person has to reach out to the committee member, or someone in the committee member has to reach out to the different person. So there is a bit of delay happening. So it's a responsibility of the management committee or the person who is managing all these volunteers to create a proper communication channel that's happening between the volunteers, I always say. And also we need to streamline the volunteers. That's the biggest thing. Like you need to keep the ball rolling, like there may be a volunteers who are more aggressive taking more programs, there may be volunteers who are not taking more programs, so you need to balance them out both. You need to find out why the person is not taking programs, so why not involving more, like why the involvement has reduced. So you need to identify the barriers. You need to try to eliminate them. You need to help them to eliminate them. One of the main barriers I've seen is like the time management, because when the people, because we are doing this volunteering on top of a personal life and the professional life, so people tend to have a problem in their managing the time, how to bring out the volunteering, how do I contribute more. So they tend to, when they always tend to give more preference to the personal and professional. Of course we have to do it, but in that cases, so as a committee member, so we need to pitch in and see, okay, if you're not comfortable with this timing, probably we can do a different timing, and then we can do a pre-recorded program if you can't do a live program. So in that way you can keep them going, like you can keep the lights on all the time. I believe this is all the role of the committee members to keep the going. And also when it comes to the appreciation, when it comes to the motivation, I think that's the very important thing as well for our broadcasters, because always when you give a constructive feedback, when you appreciate them for the content of the program, for the contribution they do, that's when they get motivated. They know that okay, someone's listening to us, someone is feeding back to us. So that's the main thing actually, every volunteer is looking for, like the appreciation, so once you give them that appreciation and the constructive feedback back to them, they'll be just keep going and be producing more good content, and then contributing for the community. So I believe that's the key for keeping the volunteers keep going. Yeah. that's it from me, Danny.
Thank you so much for that. Sorry, it just took me a little while there to find my unmute button, and I hope you don't mind me sort of going through flashing your face up there in the article that we did for you there to celebrate your win as part of the Community Radio Volunteer of the Year People's Choice Award. As you can see on that page there for the CBAA website, we've got up there. We've got an interview there with Bharati. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I know you're very busy at the moment, but going through everything that's there, and I think sort of out of all the wonderful stuff that you've done, I think there is that perception there that people think that volunteering at community radio needs to be on air, but there's so many other things there that can be done at a station, and I think you've sort of provided an example of enriching your community through volunteerism, and it not just sort of being just simply going in and doing your show, but being involved in the station in so many other capacities. So thanks so much for joining us today and having a chat with us, and congratulations once again on your win as part of the Community Radio Volunteer of the Year People's Choice Award. Ren, I will hand it back to you. Thank you so much, Bharati, and thank you for your patience with my rambling as well, everyone.
Thanks very much, Danny. Yes, thank you, Bharati. That was wonderful insights, and I do definitely agree with the showing appreciation for your volunteers, and I'll identify that a little bit at the end of this here slide. So we're going to keep going. So as Bharati was just talking about, identifying the strengths of your volunteers is really important, and one of the ways that you can do that is just, you know, do you even know what other skills or interests your volunteers have that they may be more than willing to share? And for us at 3MDR, you know, that looks like things like people who are willing to take photos, videos, tech people, even gardening. We have grounds at our station, and so, you know, people who are willing and able to get into the garden and do bits and pieces out there. Voiceovers, production, art and graphic design, even carpentry, little bits and pieces, fixing things, you know, a little bit of facilities assistance, things like that. You never know how people might be willing to help out in extra ways at your station if you don't ask them. And there's a key difference between what they're willing to share and what they're not willing to share. So just because someone is a carpenter doesn't mean that they want to come and do that on the weekend. I don't know if you've ever met any chefs and things like that. They don't often cook at home. So it's being willing to share is the very important part of that whole situation. But, you know, mostly people I reckon are, because they're already volunteering there to do their shows predominantly. And so doing a little bit extra, normally most people are very happy to do that. Managed to go forward too then. That was good of me. So does your station require your volunteers to contribute beyond their show? So at 3MDR, we currently ask for 4 extra hours a year. Not enough. I am hoping to up that in addition to people's shows, but that could be nearly anything. So I'm talking about time at 3MDR events or community market stalls, all the things I've already mentioned, promotion at other community events and online, things like if they run blogs or cross promotion on other social media for other bits and pieces. We have one of our volunteers, she's in her 90s, so we don't ask her to do working bees or stalls or anything, but she runs other blogs and is really active across whole lots of other platforms, and you know, she's always speaking 3MDR, so that's, you know, we're very happy with her contribution, you know, on those platforms above her show. Generating subscription and sponsorship leads, data entry, you know, anything like that is a way that your volunteers can help with the running of the station. If they're only there to turn up, do their show and leave, I would question again their motivation for being at a community organization, which is what your radio station is, community. It's not just one person go in, do show, leave. So I really think, you know, we have an obligation to build our internal community in so much as we're endeavoring to service our external community. So that's just kind of something to think about. You know, is there someone who's willing to do the odd social night, you know, just get together at, you know, a local venue or go to a movie or have a picnic in a park, things like that. Create opportunities for your volunteers to come together and actually share their love for your station, because that will probably increase their love for your station and it might give them a bit of a boost and they might be keen to do a few more things. Do you access opportunities like CMTO training at your station? Every time we run training at 3MDR, which is fully funded, It brings different volunteers and different presenters together, and they just love it. They love the opportunity to meet each other and upskill and do all those things. And it also fosters a sense of belonging at your station, which is really important. And it may unearth a new strength that could be utilized, or a new direction someone would like to go in at your station. You might offer audio editing training, and all of a sudden you've got yourself 2 more production volunteers or something like that. So it can work really well, but just as a baseline, bringing your volunteers together and providing them with opportunities to upskill and learn new things is really important. And, you know, CMTO can talk to you all about how you can do that as well. There's different levels. There's like pretty much training opportunities to do nearly anything at your station. So I would definitely be looking at that as an opportunity to bring your volunteers together. And then my last point for this slide does feed into what Bharati was saying around acknowledging your volunteers. So do you nominate your station shows or volunteers for CBAA awards? Nominating for awards highlights outstanding contribution by the volunteers at your station, both to the people nominated, i.e. your volunteers, your station more broadly, and the sector more broadly as well, and validates the hours of work they do for their shows. And it also clearly shows your volunteers that they are valued by their station. And it's not just broadcasting. There's awards for technical volunteers, there's awards for like one-off things, there's awards for like promotion campaigns and all these there's all different awards for things. And I think they're about to open. I'm sure Danny can let us know that later. But have a look, have a think, sit down as a team at as your station leadership team and think about who and what and how have people gone above and beyond at your station over the past 12 months, and what, you know, nominations could you put forward for. There's also NEMBC if you have ethnic broadcasters at your station and things like that. Your station might even run its own awards. So that's really important to make sure that if you've got something like that in place, that you're looking at the breadth of your volunteers to, you know, contribute to those awards and things like that as well. So that's just something that I would leave you with there in terms of identifying the strengths, and then also kind of building on them and promoting your volunteers at your station. And the very last one. So the role of board or committee members as volunteers. Many stations forget that their committee of management members are all volunteers too. Basically, this one comes down to the fact that just, you know, people forget. They're like, oh, our presenters, our presenters, our presenters, our presenters. And yes, absolutely your presenters. But don't forget who is at the pointy end of your station. And, you know, we changed the language at 3MDR. It was not just in response to our committee of management. We also have sound engineer volunteers, and we have a range of different volunteers, admin volunteers and things like that. And we were having presenter meetings, and I'm thinking to myself, hang on a minute, because I'm not a presenter really. Like, I co-host a show now, but I never started at 3MDR wanting to be on air at all. Ghastly nightmare. And so I was thinking, I'm not even talking to myself. Like, as a staff member at 3MDR, I'm calling a presenters meeting and I'm not even talking to myself. So we changed our language. They're now volunteer meetings. Anyone who volunteers at the station in any capacity is welcome. And that includes our committee. It includes all of our other volunteers. And I would get you guys to have a real think about that at your station, and just about the language that you're using around your volunteers and how that might already be cutting people out and, you know, excluding people from being involved at your community, you know, at your community radio station. So just think about that. The next point is that these people are essential at your station and deserve to be thanked often and treated with respect always. At 3MDR, I will not hear unfounded, whingy or negative personal feedback about our community members. Mostly I will challenge them and say, hey, are you willing to step in and do that job? And 90% of the time, of course, the complainer has no intention of stepping up and doing anything. They just want to whinge and point the finger. And this is not okay. This is never okay. These volunteers are so passionate about your station, they're willing to spend hours a month running it. This is something that you cannot forget at your station. These volunteers are often, you know, they're the ones driving a lot of stations. Most small and medium-sized stations don't have staff or don't have, you know, many staff hours. So your committee of management really come down as the wheelhouse of your station. And yes, you might hear from them more often when there's bad news, not good, and things like that. And I'm sure there's lots of, you know, ways that committees of management could improve their communication and things like that. But, you know, I would challenge you just to step back and think about what they're doing for your station before anyone at your station is allowed to openly point the finger and be very vocally unhappy about your committee of management. I think the challenge is always there that they would then need to step up. I think this point as well, a thankless role, as I've mentioned, and often unfairly made out to be the bad guys at your station, much to their personal detriment and that of their reputations at your station. So we had two very long-serving president and vice presidents. They served together in those two roles and swapped between them for over 10 years when our station was really in trouble quite some time ago. And I had to negotiate with them for 2 years to encourage them to step aside because they were so tired. Their time was done. They had financially massively righted the station and they were just petrified that no one else would step up. And I heard people coming at them left, right, and center. They don't do this, and he doesn't smile enough, and he's not personable enough, and blah, blah, blah. And my retort was always the same. Are you willing to do the job? Are you willing to do the job? Are you willing to step in? And, you know, no was the response. So, you know, if it's constructive feedback about how something could be done better at the station, 100% put that forward. But just pointing the finger and getting really personal with members of your committee is not okay. These guys finally both stepped away from our committee. And unfortunately, they also both resigned their shows because they'd had enough. They're still avid supporters of the station. And when we need things, they will definitely step up. And we still go to them often. We get them in to fill in. We make sure they're still connected to our station. But they were tired. Your committee of management volunteers are probably really tired, especially the ones that have been there for too long, you know? So instead of looking at that negatively, you know, I just kind of said to them, fellas, your work here is done. You deserve a break. You deserve a rest. Come back when you want to get back on air. You know, we're not going to let you wander far. And, you know, it got a bit rocky. We had a bit of turnover on our committee, you know, in the few years since then, but it's okay. We're going okay. You know, one foot in front of the other. So yeah, I just really want you guys to remember these things are very important about, you know, your board of management volunteers as well. Now, as we talked about before, there's a whole lot of further resources available for volunteer management and things like that. I'm sure this PowerPoint presentation will be able to be sent out to people who are interested, and all of the links are in the notes for this. I'll probably delete my notes. But yeah, all of the links are in the notes. So you'll be able to get everywhere you need to go to get more fantastic information. And then there's also my very last one, which, as I mentioned earlier, volunteer organizations that are state-based. So these organizations truly have amazing resources for volunteer management. You do not need to reinvent the wheel. Most of all of the issues you'll have at your station have been encountered and solved before. So don't feel isolated, don't feel under-supported. Get onto your state-based volunteering organization, get onto the CBAA, get some support, and yeah, get those volunteers rolling in your door and willing to help out at your station. And I think that's me done.
Yay, thank you so much, Rem. That was amazing. And with those, the stuff that you provided there, I've just put them as links into the Facebook for whoever is watching there. I will also put them as links into the little instant message box that we've got here in the webinar as well. While I'm doing that, Ren, there's a question that Lisa from 2MC had there in regards to the Centrelink volunteers there at this station. Is it sort of one of those things where it's a bit awkward to manage the membership requirements, i.e. sort of the people there would need to be financial members of the station, and obviously sort of that might be in a situation where that's often sometimes a little bit difficult. Is this sort of something that you've had to keep in mind when navigating that?
So we've only ever offered that opportunity to people who are already volunteering at the station. So we haven't put it out to like our broader community in regards to doing your Centrelink hours there, but we have certainly promoted it to our internal volunteers, especially those who are of a certain age or in a certain position where they need to do their voluntary hours. We just make it really easy for them to be able to do it with us, because we don't want them to do it somewhere else, because we would love their time and attention.
Was it something that was a difficult thing to get all the administration for it organised? And I'll give my because
No.
I get inquiries about that every now and then, and it is one of those things where sort of just sort of navigating I found that navigating sort of all of that has proven to be difficult for some stations, but that wasn't your experience.
No, it wasn't our experience. Phil set that up, I think, Phil and Emma set that up just before I started. So we've had it going for a while, and it's never been a problem. And Phil has shared with me that he didn't find it difficult. I don't know that now would be the time to try and do it with all the COVID stuff, although that's probably more just for Victorian stations. Other states are probably, their Centrelink's are probably less busy. So that could be something that could be doable there. Yeah, we found it pretty easy, and I think it's a pretty straightforward process. You just have to nominate as a volunteer organisation with them, and you get like a number, and your volunteers will come in and fill in a form, and you just have to verify that they're doing whatever many hours they need to be doing, and what kind of tasks they'll be doing on the form. And I think you do one of those every few months, depending on the type of like payment they're getting or whatever. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right then. Well, unless we've got any other questions, I will let Ren go, because she's put in a lot of hard work for this and did so in a voluntary capacity.
Sure did.
reflective of the CBAA webinar budget. As is a bit there at the start. For anyone watching this on Facebook, if you've got any tips about how to go in and edit a Facebook video, so the 3 minutes at the start where it's someone going, I don't know if this is working or not. Is this working? Can anyone do this on Facebook? Get in touch with us. I would also like to give a big shout out to our colleagues at the Community Media Training Organisation. Ren, of course, mentioned the various voluntary based coursework that is available from the CMTO. cmto.org.au is the website to go to. I know the wonderful Mickey would be able to help you out with anything you need there. Hey, that's Michaela there. looking cold. This won't be the last conversation we have regarding volunteers in our sector. It's an ongoing thing. It's something that is, the feedback that we get from stations is always of the sort of how do we ensure that we're attracting quality volunteers and getting everything that we can out of our volunteers. This is just a small, very, very valuable part of that conversation. It will be ongoing. Any feedback that you might have, I've put the link there in the chat box. Sorry, the link is not a very attractive one. It's like a forms.com thing with numbers there at the end of it. I've got to work on making my URLs more attractive. This is all a work in progress. I saw you both laugh there, Ren and Michaela. If only I could have had the audio recording of that, the one time that I was bringing joy to my colleagues in the community broadcasting sector. The points that Ren brought up there about the CBAA awards, might I encourage you to ensure that you're signed up to the CBAA e-news. There will be news regarding that coming through very, very soon. So be sure to keep an eye on that. And also another point I wanted to make there, and Ren said about sort of internal awards ceremonies and things like that. They don't need to be sort of official where everyone gets dressed up in a suit and tie or anything. It can be just sort of something that you do when you have your speeches at your Christmas party and things like that. I think it's a great way to sort of acknowledge your volunteers. I would suggest having not just winners announced, but also sort of finalists and things like that. It lets people know that sort of you know who's coming through the station and who's doing the great work. And you never know, sort of, you might really make someone's day by just sort of simply mentioning that they're a finalist and get sort of renewed vim and vigour from their volunteerism there at the station. Thanks to Bharati, who joined us here as part of today's session. All of the links and resources that we discussed today will be sent to you as part of an email. I hope you all had a wonderful long weekend. On behalf of the CBAA, thank you so much to Michaela and Ren. Ren, the work that you put in for this, it's amazing. You're the best. And it's sort of life, things haven't been easy there for you at the moment with lockdowns and blackouts and all of that sort of stuff. But look at you here, doing all the hard work for us. See, if you want to look to someone who's an inspirational volunteer, May I suggest that person on your screen right now? I better stop talking or I'm going to have to edit that bit out too. I know I say this all the time, but I love you all very much. And I hope to see you again as part of a CBAA webinar very soon. Ren, I'll give you a call soon. But for now, this webinar is over. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a wonderful day. Bye now.